we would love to have you on camera. We do ask if you're a member of the public who is here to observe or make public comment later, that you leave your camera off until public comment so members can focus on talking with one another. We will, as we always do, hold 10 minutes for public comment at the end of the call. If you are a member of the public who would like to speak, or you're watching this on YouTube and you want to jump over onto the Zoom, do so and shoot a chat to Carrie Steele or myself and let us know you'd like to speak during public comment. I'm going to real quickly go over the topics for today's conversation, and then we'll do, as we often do, with a little reflection and just where people are coming into the call. I know we've gone through an awful lot of the issues and challenges around accessing the outdoors. We've talked about things, let me admit one more person. We've talked about the issues from, in our last conversations, from the moment that you leave home to you arrive at a venue. We're going to be talking in the future about some of the issues around enjoying the actual venue itself, whether that's a trail, a snow park, a river, or others. And we're going to be bringing in some panelists in future months. You all have identified a number of additional pieces of information and research, and we have the DORA team working diligently on all of that. On the big picture arc of all of this, our hope is to get through these conversations around challenges, some of the research that you all would like to learn from, or some of the additional voices you'd like to initially hear. And I'll emphasize initially because we'll come back to a couple of rounds of stakeholder input. Get through that information and the initial brainstorm on some solutions by the time we hit the summer. And then we'll spend the summer doing some of that messy work of putting all of those challenges and all of those ideas on the table in front of us and start identifying some of the recommendations we want to advance. Today, we're going to detour, though, and go a little bit of a different direction. We will do some reflections on the past calls, but we're going to spend some time today. One of the topics that we heard come up in all of our conversations the last few months is a lack of public awareness, a lack of information, and in particular, some stigmas and some misunderstandings. So we want to spend some time digging into that. What are some of the specific stigmas or misperceptions that folks have? And what are some of the avenues that we may want to recommend addressing those? And again, I'll remind us all that when we talk about recommendations, recommendations may absolutely involve policy. And when I say policy, I mean with the big P, the folks at the legislature addressing it through legislation and statute. Some of it may be rules or regulations. Some of it may be best practices that you all offer as this is what folks should do. So we'll talk about that in this big public information discussion and addressing stigmas. The other place we're going to spend some time is talking about some panels that we're working to put together. Carrie has been talking with dozens of people, literally based on the ideas and the requests you all have made and some introductions being made. We're looking at 3 sets of panelists across April and May, and we'll talk with all of you about whether we need to add another meeting to accomplish this. But we want to have one set of panelists talking about from a manufacturer standpoint, whether that's adaptive equipment or ski lifts or other pieces of hard equipment that are necessary for everybody to be able to access recreation. The next one we want to talk about is program operators. Those that provide different programs for Coloradans with disability to assist in helping access some of these opportunities. The third set of panelists we're looking to put together is going to be around those that manage these different facilities, state parks, local parks, as well as the privately operated facilities. So we want to set up all 3 of those. We may combine 2 of those into one meeting, but we'll talk with all of you about that. So that's the other item on our agenda today. Carrie has a list of folks she'll talk through. We want to find out from you who else we should be considering and talking to, and specifically what questions we'd want to raise with them. So those are the 2 big meaty topics. Addressing the public information or awareness and knowledge gap, as well as stigmas, and then talking about some of these panels we'll be putting together in April and May. Let me pause there for any questions about today's agenda, and then I'm going to invite everybody in for a little reflection and just checking in. Does anybody have any questions about what we're hoping to accomplish today? Okay. Either I was really thorough or it's a short enough list that we just got through it anyway. Let me do this. we always do. I would welcome people to just reflect if there's anything that you've taken away from whether it was our call last month where we talked about from the moment you leave till you park and access, or just generally things that are on your mind as you come in today's conversation about our work and our charge to make recommendations on how to break down barriers and improve access. And Kurt, you appear top row on my screen, so I'm going to go to you first and then to Sharon.
So I was hoping somebody else would start, but I will. Things going. Just my perception is it's the difference between there's a medical model of disability and there's a social model of disability. The medical model of disability says it's your disability, there's something wrong with you, there's a deficit, it's something that needs to be fixed. It's you people over there. That's a big piece of it. Those you people over there, as opposed to the social model. Social, you kind of combine some social model and a cultural model that it's not my disability, it's the framework around me, the barriers, what society, the stigmas that they're created that you can't do that again, that something's wrong with you. That I'll tell you, there's nothing wrong with me. And it's the barriers, the societal barriers, that framework that we've been forced into, that I like to say a picture, a painting that somebody had, their perceptions have forced you into that painting. And then working out of those stigmas. And those are for people with disabilities and without. They're people with disabilities, I think, have some false perceptions that those stigmas have forced upon us. So dealing with the outside, outdoor recreation and all, you can't go to the mountains. You can't, there's your disability. There's something wrong with you. You can't go use those, as opposed to let's make some facilities and areas that are accessible that I can use.
Thank you, Kurt. And I love the way you frame that. Sharon, let me go to you. What's on your mind coming out of our past conversations or just coming into today? And I'll go to Sharon and then to Madison.
From some of the past conversations, I'm just excited to get kind of into the meat of it. We've had some good discussions. There's been a lot of brainstorming and things going on, so I'm kind of excited to see what things look like when the work begins. Because a lot of times you can lay out a plan and a foundation, and it changes day one as soon as you actually start laying bricks. So I'm waiting for that part. As far as stigmas and perceptions go, I have some of an optimistic view on things. I think usually people have this view of coming from a place of care and understanding sometimes. And so I don't know if they always see me as someone that's broken, that can't do something, but rather out of concern that things that I'm doing are unsafe. Should I be in the gym? Should I be on the mountain? It's more of a shock and awe that I'm going to hurt myself further than I've already hurt myself. And there should be some type of understanding that life is still worth living, and there's a lot of things that we're going to continue to do. And someone with a disability is just as much risk here, and someone who wants to, enjoy the outdoors or jump on a bike and do stuff just as the next person. If anything, we've learned to take care of our health a lot more than the average person. So we deserve to be out there.
I love that view of it, Sharon. And I agree. So far we've done so much of this brainstorming, just dumped a ton on the table. I want to assure everybody, I know people have probably seen these blue ribbon task forces and special groups that they do a really good job of sitting around a table and admiring a problem. And that's about where they go. We've gotten to identify it now over the coming months. It's going to be, how do we address it and how do we make things better? Let me go to Madison and then Melanie. With Madison, what's on your mind coming out of past conversations or just coming into today's?
What's on my mind is, what is the indeliverable for us, right? I'm having trouble at the moment of picturing it because, like you said, we've thrown everything out on the table, right? And it's all out there, but how do we then move from like these giant ideas that we've thrown out that we need into what are we going to actually be handing in? What are we going to be proposing? What's it going to look like? And so just understanding how we can work through that process of, at the end of the day, what are we giving to Coloradans? From a tangible perspective and an intangible perspective. And that's the thing that's really been on my mind with the subcommittee from I'd say for the last 2 months.
No, I appreciate that. And we will spend time in an upcoming call talking about it, but I want to respond to that. Our current best thinking is that the framework broadly, and you guys are going to help shape this, is that, you know, we're charged, and I'm just going to look at it and read, submit a report with our findings and recommendations, including recommendations on best practices and guidance for creating basic access to Colorado outdoor spaces for people with disabilities. Okay, that's a lot of word salad. So let me break it down of what I'm envisioning, and then all of you will help us shape this in the coming months. I think we need to look at every piece that we've talked about to date, and that means all the different forms of recreation, whether that is snow, trail, urban corridor, other forms. I think we need to look at it as we've started from the moment somebody decides to leave home to how they get to that outdoor recreation, how they park at it, how they enter it, how they experience and enjoy it, and what their departure is. So it's really from idea to arrival through enjoyment and departure. And I think within each of those, we'll break it into some buckets and we'll make recommendations for where there may need to be changes to policy and law to make things better, where there may be best practices you all recommend to our industry partners that either manufacture or operate things, what your recommendations are, what recommendations you would make to local governments, and again, whether that's recommending local ordinances and policies or that they behave and conduct things differently. So I would envision that we're going to break this down into the pieces of outdoor recreation, from arriving to entering to doing, and doing includes the equipment to do at times, and the different levers of policy or rules, of best practices, and maybe there's an opportunity to identify where we need some more partnerships. That's the initial framework that we have in mind. We've got probably 200 pieces of the puzzle on the table, and we're going to start needing to figure out which ones are edge pieces, which ones have which colors, and how do we sort them out. I also want to be very open that if we start with that framework and you guys say, hey, we're missing an entire section, we'll add to it. Melanie, let me go up to you and then to Connor with the question of, how have you been walking away from our last conversation, or where are you coming into today's? What's on your mind?
Well, I want to follow up on something Sharon said about the real work. And one of the things that I came away from the policy work that I do, the up to the eyeballs right now in state budget stuff. I loved the concept we talked about last time with gear lockers. And I came away thinking, we need some pilot programs here that are bite-sized, small, moving forward ideas where we can really road test some of the great ideas that are coming out of this group in ways that feel doable and not like we're trying to boil the ocean. And I loved that idea that we were kicking around last time of these regional gear lockers, and it just kind of has been on my mind, thinking that that's the perfect kind of thing where a recommendation on a pilot project in that space would be worthwhile. So that's a little more specific than where everybody else has been, but that's what's been on my mind.
Now, I appreciate it, and let's add that component to what our report will include. That it will likely include recommendations for some pilots. And I do want to be transparent with everybody. I know on our last meeting we talked about this from departure to arrival and transportation and entry, and we had talked initially that today's conversation may be about actually enjoying the venue. We are actively working to bring a lot more information to all of you. So we thought that conversation will be better informed by some of the panels that we're putting together for these next few meetings, which is why we switched up the order a little bit. Let me go to Connor next. And Connor, I'm just curious, what have you taken away, or as you're hearing your peers on here, what's on your mind going into today's conversation?
Yeah, thanks so much, Barrett. I think from the conversations we've had, trying to do just more listening than anything else, and feel like I've learned a lot. Feel like this is just a really great group of people, and I deeply appreciate the different perspectives on here. And to echo Sharon and so many others, Melanie, just excited to really get into some tangible ideas. I love the idea of panelists, and I think those three focus areas make a ton of sense. And hearing from folks on the ground, that I think will go a long way. I also think it's worthwhile just very quickly mentioning, since our last call, we announced the most recent round of funding in the Outdoor Equity Fund, which is a grant program housed in CPW that we partner on. And in part, because of some of the conversations we were in, I really came into those board meetings where we made those decisions with a real fire in my belly around this issue. And we announced pretty significant grants for Access Unbound, Adaptive Sports Association, Adaptive Sports Center, the Colorado Center for the Blind, and a few other really great groups, again, doing that important work on the ground. And, even though, I think there's so much need in this space and so much we can and should be doing, and that we're going to hopefully get our arms around here. But I think it's also, helpful to recognize that there's some really good stuff happening on the ground. Colorado is, one of the few states with a state grant program making grants in this space. The others are California, New Mexico. So just as a little, maybe piece of good news, as we're wrestling with some of the challenges, I think always important to keep that in mind.
I appreciate that, Connor. I appreciate you reminding us of the good work going on. I'm going to go to Christina and then to Jen with the same question. I also want to name, I sat down with Carrie, who has compiled, I think, probably 100+ pages of notes from our conversations, if not more. And while they may seem like they've been just kind of all over the place, we started highlighting and circling and drawing lines between things. And there's probably 3 or 4 dozen ideas that have surfaced just in all of you naming, here's the problem, and wouldn't it be better if? So I don't want anybody to think for a minute that these haven't been productive beyond just having a conversation. There's a ton of ideas there, and that's what we're really excited as we go into May and June to start putting those on the table. And Connor, I'm glad to hear the panels seem to make sense. It's what we were hearing from all of you, is that hearing from some of the people that manage these facilities, hearing from the people that make the equipment would be helpful, as well as some of the people that run some of the amazing programs here. Christina, let me go to you. What has stood out to you or been your, weighing on your mind, or what are you thinking coming in today?
Yeah, my thoughts of like everybody else said, aligned with everybody else, what everyone else has said. Really on the same page as Madison. A lot of my thoughts right now are what is our end game? What does our deliverable look like? How are we moving policy forward? How are we impacting this on a macro level for 10 years down the line as well? And specifically, how are we doing that without siloing our conversations? I think that's so easy to do in government spaces, of these very insular conversations. And the motto of the disability rights movement is nothing about us without us. And that means all of us. And so I want to make sure, I think all of that to say, I want to make sure whatever our deliverable ends up being, that we are including the voices of every single person who's going to be impacted, which is so hard to do. This is like the forever and always the reaching question of disability policy, is how do we do that? But yeah, and I don't have an answer, but that's my question of the day, I guess.
It's quite all right. And I certainly don't have the full answer or the perfect answer. I will throw a couple of things out. You mentioned the siloing, and I will tell you, across every subcommittee, this conversation, the conversation we have with the group about government services, whether it's being able to run for office, serve in office, participate in public discussions, every group we've had, somebody brings up, well, what about transportation? So I think there are some conversations that definitely make sense for everybody, for us to bring the different groups together. We are also exploring ways that we can open these panels up to everybody, give you guys the focus and probably the camera time when we're talking with the outdoor rec folks, but make sure we're inviting the executive council of the task force, and you see the lieutenant governor and her senior policy advisor, Josh, are on the line, but give you the opportunity to have the conversation with the panelists while we invite the other subcommittees and the task force members, so we're not siloing. The other thing, Christina, I think, and we'll talk about this particularly on our next call, we've had a number of conversations about what stakeholders should we reach out to. I think as you all start taking this giant jigsaw puzzle and putting some ideas on the table, even if they're only half-baked, I think that's going to be the time we're going to want to really lean on each of you and your networks to get reaction to those from a lot more people and say, this is what we're thinking about. How does this stand with what you've experienced? How would this work with what you're looking to do? Let me go to Jen and then John on this question of what are you taking away from our calls to date, and hearing all of your peers today, what's on your mind?
Well, I think all of this discussion has just been amazing. As a parent with a child with a disability, it's really, it just warms my heart that there's so many different types of people out there who are willing to help make things better. I think there's a couple of things that I've been talking about and thinking about. One is creating those partnerships. And as a few people have said about who are we missing at the table. And that's a theme I think that goes through, as you said, with a lot of different subcommittees. But we're actually going to be a part of an inclusive trail seminar that's happening in Ridgeway in a couple of weeks. And so she can take her wheelchair and work with BLM, the state parks. And it has nothing to do with this committee, but we just got invited to go there. And it really made me start thinking about partnerships and how we are going to need to create those, because this isn't something that's just about federal agencies and state agencies. It's also about the private sector and the public sector, and how are we going to all work together to bring any of these deliverables. And then just down to little things too, more practical, kind of like Melanie was saying. We were up skiing in Crested Butte a few weeks ago, which was absolutely wonderful. And some of our friends who are able-bodied said they don't take the bus a lot because the back of the bus doesn't have any place to put their skis. And so they have to carry their skis on the bus. So for an able-bodied person, that was frustrating. So just little things like that, like putting the ski things on the back of ski buses to help get to those lockers that Melanie's talking about. So wide range of thoughts, but I think partnerships are probably have been the biggest thing on my mind.
I appreciate that, Jen. Thank you. John, what's on your mind? John is off camera, so he may have had to take care of something else. I'll bring him back in. I'm going to shift our conversation. As I said, we want to start talking about the public knowledge, the public perception, and particularly the stigmas. We're going to do today's conversation a little differently. Rather than going around and everybody just brainstorming one idea and then somebody getting the next, what I'm going to ask is for each person to share something out there where there's a stigma, a misunderstanding, or just a lack of information, and who that misunderstanding is among. Is it the general public? Is it the able-bodied community? Is it equipment manufacturers? Then what I'm going to do is ask all of the group to one by one weigh in with what are some strategies we might recommend to address that. And those may run the gamut from forging new partnerships and encouraging them. It may be talking about a new role of the state in their communications, or local government, or manufacturers. But I want to focus on what is one stigma or misperception or a knowledge gap that is creating barriers and challenges. And then we're going to talk as a group on that particular stigma or misinformation about what are all of the different levers we may want to explore to address it. And I'm going to switch up the order in no particular direction. But Christina, I keep calling on you last, which means everybody else has already aired the idea. So I'm going to go to you first with the question of what's whether it's a stigma or just incorrect or missing information out there, and who is it that has this wrong idea.
That is an open door. I will try and bullet point that one. I think the first thing that comes to mind for me is that when we talk about folks with disabilities and we talk about the disability community, that's an incredibly diverse community. It's a huge umbrella. And the vast majority of that umbrella does not have a physical disability. And when we say, oh, we need to make things more accessible, the first things that come to people's brains are ramps, elevators. Like when I say I'm an ADA specialist, it's like parking lots, which is, yes, so important. But also that, that service is a small percentage of this massive, massive, massive diverse community. And so I think when we have these conversations, and just kind of like, who are we talking about? My number one thing is making sure we're not forgetting folks with non-physical disabilities as well, because it's so, so, so important, and non-apparent disabilities. Yeah.
And because I don't want to assume anything, I'm going to ask for clarification. What is the group that we're talking about that jumps to that? Oh, you must mean the ramp or the grab bar. Is it general public? Is it government? Is it park operators? Is it all of the above?
In my experience, it's a whole lot of all of the above. I work in government. I've worked in government for a long time. I see it from all over the government spectrum. I see it from members of the general public. I see it from, nonprofit employees. I'm a social worker by training. I see it from the social work field. I've seen it in every way, shape, and form in my career and in my personal life. So, yeah.
All right. So now this is where the group gets into the solution business. And Kurt, I'm going to go to you, and then Madison. And I welcome you going as broad, as narrow, as specific, or as high level. People have this misunderstanding or their assumptions about what we mean when we say a person with a disability. What are some of the ways that we could recommend taking action to correct that, whether that's through government, nonprofit, or community action?
Well, this is a big, broad area too to focus it down, and first of all, it always shocks me how many people that I interact with that have no clue about any of this. That if you don't know, you don't know. I don't like to play blame. If you place blame on anybody in particular, but if you don't know, you don't know. And I mean, there is no discussion publicly anywhere about all the things that we talk about on here, whether it's just physical access, or let's say somebody who is neurodivergent. What are their needs in the outdoor? God, to narrow it down, just people with disabilities are not, we're not on TV. There's no history in school. There's no cultural awareness in schools. I'd like to have an easy answer here, but it's such a broad spectrum. But I know, visuals of people with various disabilities experiencing the outdoors successfully. Like Sharon talked about, people tell him they're afraid he's going to hurt himself, or we might hurt ourselves. Little visuals of people of Sharon actually doing what he does successfully and having a great time at it, that those stigmas, I mean, people just don't see it.
Let me do this. Let me try to separate this out, and we're going to get to where I think started surfacing, which is the true abilities rather than the deficits of individuals with disabilities. Sticking to just this question of the breadth of disabilities, that there is a general knee-jerk jump to we must be talking about a mobility issue. And let's look at two audiences. Let's look at the general public. And I'm thinking back to and I'll date myself, the after-school specials with The More You Know on ABC. If we were trying to educate the general public, or if the goal was to educate government leaders and employees at all levels, from the county clerk to the governor's cabinet. Whether you were looking to educate government people or the general public, and Madison, I'm going to you and then Sharon, what are some tools you might imagine to simply educate people about the diversity and the broad scope of disabilities and how they affect different people's living?
You know, something you said took me back to that 6th grade health class, right? That I think all of us sat in. And it's like understanding that everybody is different, right? But the thing that they didn't really touch on was, what does that mean? Right? And so being able to dive into what is a disability? What are they, like, how can different disabilities present across a broad spectrum, right? And so even just opening up the conversation, starting at a younger age for folks to be like, we can talk about this. This doesn't have to be behind closed doors, right? This is a conversation that we should be having with children, young adults, to your point, older adults, right? Individuals who are in government across the spectrum. But for me, maybe it's refocusing on curriculum for K through 12 education as part of, if you're going to be taking a health class, right? That means, and I'm just using that as an example, it could be in a math class, it could be wherever, but it's opening it up to say, like, this is a space where we talk about this, right? And look, there's 30 other students in this class. You can be talking about these things in open spaces, this is not something that needs to be hidden. This is not something that is shameful in any way to discuss. So that, I don't know, I think I'd start at the education level, as young as you can get.
I gotta tell you, Madison, I absolutely love that. It's not anything that was remotely on my radar, and I have to confess, I'm somebody who spent a decade working in education policy and around curriculum, and I had a blind spot there. So I'm glad you raised that. We had been talking about how do you do PSAs and seminars for government officials. I love that you brought us really down to breaking it down to where do we start this, and maybe it's inviting our friends over at the Department of Early Childhood and the Department of Education into some of these conversations. I'll leave that to you, what gets recommended, but I'm glad you're expanding what we're putting on the table. Sharon and then Connor, when you think about this stigma or this assumption people jump to, that when we say disabled, it must mean mobility disabled, in a wheelchair, needs a ramp. How do we start expanding people's understanding of what disabled encompasses?
Yeah, I think part of that's kind of hard. I mean, the standard sign that we all know for handicapped people is a person in a wheelchair. So from the beginning, we've already generalized it as a physical disability. But I have seen, it was quite some time ago, actually, at a movie theater on the handicapped parking spaces. They had different photographs of different people with different disabilities, and it said, please think of me before parking here. There's a person in a walker, there's a person with crutches, there's a person in a wheelchair, there's a person with an educational disability, and each parking spot had an individual disability. So as soon as you park there, you're seeing someone with a different type of disability. And I thought that was a really cool representation of that. Um, and then, as brought up earlier, I think education and in the school areas, a great place to start. My son had broke his leg 2 years ago, and while it was a temporary injury, the teachers in the school's idea to again protect him was to keep him inside during recess. So when he needed activity the most and to be with friends the most, he had to go to the principal's office because they didn't want other kids pushing him around in a wheelchair or him getting injured. And so he's already isolated and cut off for having an injury when he needs to be active and around others the most. And that was their way of handling it. So, I mean, I think there's some education in the school that could be beneficial, not just for the kids, but the people overseeing it and teaching the kids. I believe now they do introduce some adaptive sports as part of the gym class, which I thought was really cool. So maybe continuing things like that. But yeah, those would be a couple of the things that come to mind first.
Thanks, Sharon. I'm going to go to Connor and then Melanie. And Connor, thinking about from educating our youngest to re-educating our older Coloradans. what are some ways you see either in the general public, in the private sector, or in the government sector, where we can help people to better understand the broad range of disabilities?
Yeah, this this is it's a great challenge to call out because it's a really tough one to uh, figure out. It's big, and I would quite frankly agree with what's been said. I think education is at the core here. I think if we can um, help shape and better inform some of the curriculum, that is incredibly helpful in producing young adults and adults that can help perpetuate that education. I think adults are a lot harder to educate. We can do that through some sort of marketing campaign. I think that has been done. I think there are probably good examples out there, maybe not at the scale that we'd want to see, but I think there are groups that have done good examples, both of trying to educate around the breadth of disability, but also changing the paradigm of the nexus of disability and outdoor recreation, and changing that paradigm of recreation that it always has to be, an able-bodied, white dude on a skiing some crazy mountain or, running some river. That is what a lot of people think of, unfortunately, when they think recreation, and not only for the disability community, but for, all kind of historically marginalized communities. That's a pretty huge disservice, as we know, and does not make people feel comfortable, does not welcome people in. And so just doing what we can to change that paradigm. I go back to, it's a lot tougher to do with adults because, we're trying to do this in the destination stewardship space, and trying to teach stewardship principles through the Do Colorado Right campaign and a bunch of other things. And it's, we're certainly seeing some progress, but it's hugely expensive. Adults, generally speaking, have, their minds made up. Their view of the world is fairly hardened. Unfortunately, we're seeing a lot of that. And so, I say marketing campaign, but I want to sit with that and think through, like, are there other things we can do that, can be more effective, especially with adults?
I appreciate that. Melanie, I'm going to come to you with the same question, but I'm also going to ask you a subset within it. So I would welcome, Melanie, your thoughts on everything from our early childhood kids through our grade school, our high school, our young adults, and our adult population. I'd also be curious, you're one of our few industry reps on this particular subcommittee. And I'm curious how we could work with industry, and I'm not picking on ski country, I'm talking private sector at large, how we can do better and engage them as partners to educate people about the full scope and breadth of what we may mean when we talk about somebody with a disability.
Because I work in the ski industry and in the trade association world, I want to pile on Connor's idea of a marketing campaign. We in the ski industry have been building January as National Safety Awareness Month. Maybe what we need in the outdoor recreation space is to pull together all the groups like ours in the ski industry, the rafting industry and the golf industry, and all the various groups that sort of represent sectors of outdoor activity, and come up with a social media campaign that's embracing our fellow citizens with disabilities month, and have just a series, create an outline of, hey, over the course of the month, every Saturday, we're going to post content that engages with our friends with disabilities and engaging in the outdoors, and just things that the world is very attuned to social media these days, and it moves the needle in a lot of respects better than other types of campaigns. And there may be a way that the recreation industry's various representatives could work together on something like that.
I appreciate that idea, Melanie. Thank you. I'm going to go to Jen, and then John, if you're in a place to join us, I'll bring you in. If not, we'll keep coming back to you. Jen, your thoughts on this question of whether it's our oldest or our youngest, all of them and everybody in between, what are some ways we can educate people?
Yes to all of the above. Well, another committee that I work on, we work with how to set up persons with disabilities and students with employment. And we're, starting in kindergarten, and that's the hope of, how do we set up success for someone with a disability to get a job once they're out of high school or once they're ready to go into their secondary education. And so I agree that starting as young as we can will definitely benefit. But I was just looking, the ADA was passed in 1990 and the 504 Rehabilitation Act was in 1973. So many of this disconnect or people's immediately jumping to physical disabilities is really all new stuff in our culture. People with disabilities with a physical disability were probably the first people that were really being recognized that they needed help, because our society and our culture, if you had a disability, you were often in a rehab center somewhere. You look back even in the 1940s, 50s, that you didn't see people with disabilities. And so we're really now, of course, with ADA and with technology, that if you have a disability, whether it's a sensory processing disorder or like my daughter uses a communication device, and people automatically assume that she's not smart because she can't communicate. So she can't communicate vocally, I guess I should say. So even though we might start educating at a younger level, I think that's hugely important, but there is a bigger picture of biases that have been with us for hundreds of years that are still there. And just also, I think having real life experiences. There's a group, I think in Pennsylvania and maybe other places, where they take kids in wheelchairs to the park and put them in a wheelchair and say, here, go play on the playground in a wheelchair. And these are kids that don't normally use wheelchairs, so having those experiences. And another thought that came to mind was some of you may have seen the Welcome to Earth videos with Will Smith and Eric Weinmeier. And they were fascinating. And they were standing on top of a volcano. Will Smith and Eric, who is a blind climber and raft guide and amazing person, was talking about how he felt that volcano. And even if he couldn't see it, what he was experiencing. And it was a light that went on in my brain. I was like, oh my gosh, yes, that is, he is physically learning and feeling that with his entire body. And so trying to figure out and help people understand how others experience their world, I think could be beneficial.
Thank you. And I'm going to confess, every time somebody speaks or goes off camera, you shuffle around on my Zoom screen. I think we brought everybody in on this conversation, but raise your hand if I didn't get you in. Okay. Then Kurt, I gave you the tough job of being the first to offer a solution. Now I'm going to let you throw the problem and the grenade into everybody else's lap. I'm curious, what's another stigma, another misunderstanding, whether it's the needs for equipment, the needs of athletes, the different abilities that people, as we've heard a few times, oh, you can't do that. What's another big one that our solutions may be slightly different than what we just talked about of that broad-reaching education campaign, or that we need to build upon? What's another stigma that needs correcting in the public dialogue?
The first one that comes to my mind is that if folks with disabilities are brought in, we're going to lose something.
Mm-hmm.
It might be financially, it might cost too much. I got to pay more taxes, do that. Or, you know, if we make this real accessible, is it going to ruin nature? You know, that type of thing. So when the reality, it's something very much in between that, you know, that again, we're looking at people at the deficit as opposed to the asset that we're going to bring to the table. The fact that, hey, you know, I have a job, I have money to spend. Do you want my money, or, you know, is my money not as green as yours? You know, that type of thing. If it's accessible and it's going to look bad, it's going to do away with nature, it's going to lessen my experience. Well, have you thought maybe I might know something about this area that we're in, and I might be able to teach you something, you know, some experience that you've never had before. And can I throw something in really quick too about the educating piece? The one thing my employers allowed me to do is do a lot of disability, we call it disability etiquette and language training, but actually, as opposed to just a video, of having an interactive session. So whether it's with school kids, emergency managers, doctors, I've done a bunch of different groups to be able to have an open discussion, because I think a lot of these things are thrown at people with a video, and there's no way for them to get feedback and have some interaction and trust and those types of things too. So sorry, I just really thought it important to throw that in.
I'm glad you added that to the conversation, and I'm going to kind of paraphrase what I heard from you, and tell me if I'm presenting this back to the group incorrectly, but it's really, what is the cost of making things more accessible? And some people view that as a financial cost. Some people may say there's a cost to me. I don't get to enjoy it as much if you do that. Some people may say there's a cost to nature. You're saying actually the cost is more than worth it by what's added, and that it's additive. So is that a fair way to frame it for our discussion?
Correct.
Perfect.
Very good.
All right, then I'm going to go to Connor and then Christina. Connor, people think that doing this will cost them, the state, nature. It'll cost something that they don't want to see given up, rather than seeing the cost is not allowing and inviting everybody to enjoy. What are some strategies we can do to address that?
Yeah, I mean, again, this is one I'd love to think on a little more. I think that, you know, Curtis is totally right. This does, I think, come up in these conversations in some form or fashion. And I think, again, it's kind of, we need to flip the paradigm and educate people on the benefit, all the different benefits that human beings derive from time outdoors and time in nature. You know, no matter who they are. I mean, that there's, you know, something intrinsic in that. You know, also, I think can make an economic case. I mean, this is a huge amount of our population in the state and in this country that, you know, will benefit from this, want to be a part of it, and will drive a ton of economic impact. This is one of the largest, most important economic sectors in the state, and so that is an important piece. You know, so I think, and there's, you know, more than that, but I think really focusing on benefits, focusing on the economic aspects, and showing examples of, you know, where has this worked? Because again, I mean, I mentioned all those great organizations earlier. We're doing a lot of this in communities all around the state. And I think that when we can lift those organizations up, I mean, many of the, you know, organizations that you all represent on this call, and get the word out, start to shift that paradigm a little bit, I think that will help quite a bit. Again, it's a slow and, you know, intense process, but I think all of those things, you know, a strategy around that would be incredibly helpful.
I love that. Christina, how do we flip the paradigm of how people are viewing it as costing instead of adding?
Ooh, it's a great question. As somebody who works in the ADA, this is a conversation I have all the time. And what I think I've been sitting here trying to think of what are the common responses I get to this question a lot. And honestly, kind of going back to what Kurt said, the second I get into a conversation about, okay, so your ramp isn't compliant, that's going to cost money to fix. But when we talk about, yeah, like Connor said, this is a quarter of the US population. This is a lot of people who are going to be in and out of the door using that ramp. They have a lot of buying power. They have a lot of social power. They have a lot of power in their presence there, and we need to make sure that they're included. So I think once we start having those conversations, people, you kind of see their gears going in their head saying like, oh yeah, you're right. It's like, yeah. From my experience too, a lot of people, especially maybe this is just where the corners of the government that I'm working in, a lot of people that I talk to have just never had a conversation about disability in like a working manner. They've had like here's how we be nice to disabled people talks, or like maybe their church has told them something, or they've learned something in school, but they've never had like a real heart to heart, this is what disability is, and like this is how we're going to define it, and like it's different than maybe what you see on TV. It's everywhere. And once we start having those conversations, it changes everything, because people then are like, oh, yeah, we should have an accessible bathroom or a working ramp. And I'm like, you're right, we should. And again, how we do that on a broad scale, I think Connor voiced it perfectly, of these conversations happen in communities all over, especially in the outdoor world. I work in paraclimbing and I grew up in the adaptive ski community, and those conversations are happening all the time. And so I think going back to our original question in this group today of like, what's on the forefront of my mind going into this meeting is like, how do we take these tiny little conversations of disability and inclusion and turn it into something that's macro and deliverable? Yeah. Hopefully that answered that question.
No, it is. And all of this, I think we're getting the maybe not 10,000 foot, the 5,000 foot idea. Our challenge this summer is going to be to get all the way down into the blades of grass and turn these into actionable ideas that are going to move the needle. John, let me bring you in, and then I'll go to Jen. This idea that people see accommodating or making shifts to ensure access for all Coloradans and Coloradans with disabilities will somehow cost somebody rather than add to our economy, our community, and everything involved. What are your ideas of how and where we can shift that thinking?
Absolutely. I think that's a great question. I think there's ripe opportunity to do so in every respect, but particularly in the adaptive athletic world. We can definitely start with the established larger companies that already have the infrastructure and the revenue in place to partner with and sort of use their marketing budget as a way of integrating people with disabilities who might not be able to access the outdoors as easily as some other people are, and sort of make it a priority for them to integrate members of those communities more. I'll give you an example. And I apologize. I've been away, and if I'm making something too long or whatever, forgive me. One company that I have in mind is Vail Resorts in particular, because they already have demonstrated a priority to include disabled skiers and snowboarders by selling and publicizing their adoptive pass, which is a reduced rate pass that allows more disabled skiers to enjoy their offerings at a reduced rate. in a way that other competitors don't. So I don't mean to shamelessly plug Prevail Resorts, but I'm just using that as an example of where I think we can really make some headway in getting our names out there, so to speak, like the identity of that people with disabilities exist and they deserve to enjoy the outdoors as much as anybody else does. That should be a priority for the companies who stand to profit enormously from our engagement. So that would be
Thank
where
you.
I would start.
I love that, kind of just switching it all around to what they stand to gain. Let me go to Jen and then Madison. And then after Madison, I'll go to Sharona and Melanie. Jen, your thoughts on how we switch people's thinking, and whether it's general public, manufacturers, operators, that this is an additive thing, not a cost that we're asking somebody to bear.
I don't have any real huge great ideas about that.
Okay.
But what I think just looking at the abilities, not the disabilities, is a way for employers and organizations, governments to take a look at things. Like we had an instant here with our local Parks and Rec department that they need to put in a boat ramp and a little stand-up paddleboard. Again, I'm talking about ramps, but for people to come to get in and get on a paddleboard. And they said, well, they have ramps other places. They don't need ramps, everywhere. And so there's that disassociation from us and them, but pretty soon the aging population is going to be what? Over 60% of the United States. And, so that have that retirement income, not just persons with disabilities. And to me, it would just make sense, as John was saying, that, we put it into the operating budget, and that's just part of how you do things. It's part of doing good business and doing the right thing.
Thanks, Jen. Madison and Sharon, and I know it gets tougher as you've heard a half a dozen of your colleagues offer up ideas, so feel free to build on those or add additional thoughts that you have about how do we shift people's thinking.
All right, I'm going to throw out something ridiculous, but
No.
hear me out, because there is a cost on the one that I'm going to propose, but it's a shared cost, and not in the sense of like a diminutive cost, I think, which is right, Curtis, what you were getting at is it's like, if I don't get it, then you're not going to get it kind of thing. Or if I get it, then you're taking away from me. So a crazy pie in the sky idea, like a private public partnership municipal bond, right? We know that municipal bonds can do good things, but a benefit of like having a private public partnership one, right, is you get the big companies in on this, right? So you look at those Colorado companies that already, like, we bring them in and they're going to put in money for advertising of like why we need to be pushing this. So bring in VF bring in Vail Resorts, bring in whoever. I mean, like, yeah, we're committing to this too, and have a really big marketing campaign about getting a giant municipal bond going for outdoor accessibility, right? And so then people actually have a shared ownership. They're getting to vote on something, right? They're choosing to take that cost on and build something for all of Colorado. And so I think there could be some fun money things to do with that, and not looking at just a government bond, but bringing in that public-private partnership bond aspect to putting something out.
I appreciate that, Madison. And I want to be clear to you and to everybody, there's no such thing as a crazy idea or too wild of an idea for these discussions. The one thing I will assure you is nobody's going to take the recommendations you put forward and say, what if we got even more bold, more aspirational? Things will get tempered down. So let's keep the thinking big and bold. Let me go to Sharon and then Melanie on this idea of, if you want to name a specific audience or just talk generally, how do we shift people's thinking about this being additive versus a cost or a burden?
I think it's definitely an additive thing, and it might be just framing it for people a bit different. If it's listed as accessibility instead of for the general public, I guess kind of what I have in mind, like say just the width of a hallway or a door or a ramp. If you've ever seen a mother with a double wide stroller trying to access something, they need just as much room as a wheelchair. Elderly person with a mobility scooter or a walker will need just as much room. It just needs to become a new standard. We have different devices, people are living longer. It makes it easier and more convenient for the general public and not just people with disabilities, but it does help and impact people with disabilities as well. And I think learning to think about it that way and the longevity of life from, a parent with kids in a stroller having to lug a bunch of stuff around all the way to our elderly. I have family members my grandfather has Alzheimer's, and so my grandmother's helping him a lot. It runs to the end of life. Like, it's going to go from point A to point B throughout our lifehood, and it's helping the general public as a whole.
I like that option to put on the table. Melanie, your thoughts. How do we get people to expand the thinking of the advantages and benefits rather than the burdens and the costs?
Well, I'm in practical mode today. And so one of the top thoughts that came to mind as we started this conversation is we need an economic impact study. If 25% of our population is impacted in some way, shape, or form by some sort of disability, folks are spending a lot of money, they're paying a lot of taxes, and a powerful economic impact study that helps tell that story. Maybe it comes out of Connor's department, maybe it comes out of another department of state government, but that's another practical way to start getting some headlines and start telling the story.
Thank you, Melanie. And I think it is important, and you bring us to this, to think about all of the levers and incentives or motivations. We can appeal to people's better angels. We can appeal to decency. We can appeal to income. We can appeal to community. There's a lot of things. And I would encourage this group to think about all of those different levers and all of the things that may motivate people. I think we should really be thinking about the outcome rather than just what drives any one person to be part of getting to that outcome. We're at 4:05 and I'm not seeing anybody from the general public. Taylor from the chamber, I see you on. If you're listening, we certainly welcome you listening in. If you wanted to address us during public comment, if I could ask you to drop me a note in the chat, I would appreciate that. Otherwise, I'm going to keep using this time to talk with this group. I am going to shift us now. I hope you hear in all of this why we wanted to have this conversation, to start informing our panel discussions, to inform the balance of rounding out our research so we can start putting together, as you all have identified, the tangible, the micro level on this. With that, I want to switch to the panels. And I'm going to ask Carrie in a second to do a quick read through of some of the folks that we've identified, and whether it's individuals that we've talked with, been introduced to, or roles where we may say, we think this is the type of person, we need you and others to help us identify who that person is. But again, the three categories we're thinking for panels right now are those involved in the equipment manufacturing side of things, those involved in operating facilities, whether that's government or private sector, recreational venues and facilities, and the third being those involved in different programs for adaptive athletes and recreation. And Carrie, if maybe you want to just give a sense of who you've been talking with and who you're thinking about, and then we really want to hear from all of you on two topics. Who else should we make sure is part of these panels? And what are the specific questions you would like posed to them? Or you can look at it the other way. What are the answers? What's the information you would want to gain from those panels? So Carrie, if you want to do a run through of who you've been talking to and what you're thinking for these panels.
Sure. Thanks, everyone. This is the fun part of for me because I don't get to talk a lot in these meetings. I'm always taking notes and listening to all your brilliant thoughts and ideas. But I have had just some wonderful opportunities over the past couple weeks. Some of our executive committee members have made some introductions for us that I hope some of you may know, some industry folks, program leaders, but I'm hoping at the end of this discussion, you guys will say, hey, I know somebody else that I'd love to bring to the discussion. But I've had a lot of conversations over the past couple of weeks with program administrators, the folks that Ignite Adaptive Sports up at Eldora Mountain. They're doing really great things. I was introduced to a gentleman named Topher for the city of Boulder. He leads a lot of trail access, we'll say stroll and rolls throughout the metro area. There's just so many great people doing really cool things out there in the world of programs, and everybody comes down to awareness. A lot of these how do we just make people more aware that this exists? So those are some of the great conversations. If you guys know more folks in the world of adaptive sports equipment manufacturers, that would be really great. Those would be really great introductions. And then we're going, I get these connections to skiing, to trails. Hunting and fishing is one that's come up, and we haven't been able to track down somebody in that realm. So if anyone comes to your mind there, would also be a great recreational opportunity to bring to the table. We're also looking on the kind of parks and rec or state side. We're looking at bringing people in from Denver Parks and Rec, Department of Natural Resources. We're looking at park rangers, the Bureau of Land Management, Great Outdoors Colorado, all these organizations that have to do with actual access and maintenance of some of our state parks and city parks. So that will be an interesting piece of one of the panel discussions as well. And then like Barrick mentioned, transportation is a really big one that crosses almost every single one of our subcommittees. So I think what we might do at some point is have one big panel discussion about transportation with all of the subcommittee members. It's such a big piece to accessing anything, government services, outdoors, housing. So you name it, that's one where they're also. So if you guys know people who provide those particular kind of services, whether they are, we've got the state folks covered, whether it's CDOT, things like that. But I know there's a lot of private and nonprofit enterprises out there who offer some of that, those transportation needs too. So if we can pull everyone together there, if you guys know folks in that area, I'd love an intro. And I'll just keep having these conversations and get these panels together for you in April.
So here's what I'm going to do. I'm not going to put people on the spot, but I do want to have some kind of order. So I'll ask people to raise your hands virtually or physically. And if I don't see hands, I'm going to start raising your hands by calling on you. I want to make sure anybody who has thoughts, questions you'd like asked of the panelists, answers you'd like to walk away with, or people by name or role you'd like to see involved. And Jen, I don't know if you were dealing with something there or raising your hand, but I see no other hands, so I'm going to call on you first anyway.
Actually, I was doing both. I was going to ask Carrie if she wanted us to email those things. And then I heard strange noises from Cody. So listening with one ear over there. So your question is about who we would like to see and what questions we would like to have talked about.
Yeah, because we want your ideas on who we want for any one of these three panels. The people organizing, the people responsible for managing venues, or those making the equipment. And we want to do a little prep with them so they come to this ready to provide the information you're interested in.
Well, I think that the manufacturers would be a really great place because utilizing, well, again, from a mobility standpoint, equipment is so difficult to come by. Although there are some great manufacturers here in Colorado that make snowboard or bi-skis and monoskis and things like that. But are there tech companies that would be able to work with like BLM and the Forest Service on making their interpretive, or even cities, so that their interpretive programs were recorded so that people could access them? If you walk up to a tree and they give you the little interpretive display, and is there a button that pushes? I mean, who does that? I know that that's possible, but how can we get something like that? Again, trying to branch out into people that have other types of abilities. And the hunting and fishing, I think we have over here in Grand Junction, we have a person that I can contact about on Colorado Parks and Wildlife that takes people out on hunts and things. So I can look into that and forward you that as well. And also my sister-in-law is also the recreation director for BLM in the state right now. And so I've asked her to maybe see if she could come and talk with us as well. And I haven't heard back yet, but I can forward that along too, because she's very interested in different types of accessibility, not just mobility as well. So those are just the manufacturers. Plus, I mean, I worked in Parks and Recreation for a long time. And so I know that there are many great people out there. And so I'm looking forward to hearing from them as well. But I think giving people access to the goods and services that they need would be really interesting.
Yeah.
We will take you up on tracking down those folks. And if folks know specific manufacturers, I know Carrie's been having some conversations, and Rep Ortiz knows some folks. If you know of manufacturers, even if you don't know the people there or the contact, we'll take contacts, absolutely. Or if you just say, hey, this company makes some great gear, let us know. I'm going to go to Kurt, but Carrie, did you have a follow-up there with Jen?
I just wanted to say, if you guys make these intros for me, I don't want anyone to feel like they're just going to be thrown onto a panel in April without some sort of background. So I'm happy to have all these conversations in advance to see how what perspectives they would want to share, and so we can kind of fit them into the right conversations with the right people. And then I've noticed you guys have been blowing up the chat. Whoever can get Eric Weinmeier to the table wins the gold star.
We'll work on it.
Thanks, Carrie.
I'll do what I can do.
Yeah.
Perfect, John. We're putting it on you. Kurt, your hand's up. Who should we be talking to, and what should we be asking them?
So along the transportation line, to include the charter companies, and then other transportations, private, that offer transportation. Let's say from like DIA to Vail, those kind of limousine companies. Not necessarily Uber or Lyft, but other car service type organizations. How would they benefit? How could they benefit if they had for equipment or transportation services that are accessible for individuals, tourists, local folks, whatever. Gosh, there was something else now it's off my mind. I think are there companies these days that service all these different pieces of equipment? I've run in the wheelchair business was not very service oriented business, their business model, but there is a wheelchair company in Denver now that my organization is dealing with that is using a service model, and they were doing a free clinic for me every month, but now they can't because they're so overwhelmed that piece, that realization, gosh, there's money to be made. I think some big things, and I don't know, are there companies that maintain, John Trone, that would be my question. Are there companies that fix stuff when it's broken? They involve them.
So with that, since Sharon's hand wasn't up yet, I will raise it myself and call Sharon in. I don't know if you know anything about how many of these companies are servicing their own equipment, or if there are niche servicing businesses being started, but also just Sharon, a general question to you of, for any of these panels, who would you like to see us engage, and what do you think would be helpful for this group to hear from them?
As some things with like adaptive equipment that I've seen, a lot of people end up making their own equipment just because there's not huge manufacturers out there. And then things that are tied to accessibility or disability equipment, it's usually very overpriced and extremely difficult to get, where people are going off on their own and doing stuff. So I don't have any company or anyone specific that comes to mind. It might actually be talking to someone that could manufacture stuff or find ways to fix things, or maybe, building it from the ground up. That's kind of a tough one. I've seen, I believe there's a resort in Montana or a couple of other places that specialize just in ranch retreats. They do skiing, four-wheeling, fishing, hunting. I can't remember the name off the top of my head, so I would have to look them up to get that to you. And then I've spoken to Jason Stouffer a couple of times for Unite to Fight Paralysis. He's tried to push policy and law in a couple of other states and has had quite a bit of success, but has already done a lot of legwork in adaptive sports, and spent this last summer, I believe, using a hand cycle to get across the Grand Canyon rim. So he's put himself out there and tried a couple of different things and has some experience himself and on the policy side.
Is that somebody you'd be willing to reach out to and pick his brain, or maybe connect with Carrie?
Yeah, I can talk to him.
That would be fantastic. Christina, whether we're talking climbing or general access, who do we need to put on some of these panels, whether it's programs, manufacturers, operators, and who do you want the opportunity to hear from?
Yeah. So you mentioned, I obviously work in climbing. I talk about it all the time. I work with a lot of climbing nonprofits that are based here in Colorado. Colorado has the most paraclimbers per capita than any other state. I think there are a lot of people out there who are really pushing that right to risk and that right to accessible risk that live in the Front Range. And I'm happy to connect Carrie to a slew of names if that is something that we want on the panel. I also want to flag that there's some really great consultants who are disabled, who are out pushing accessible outdoor spaces already. The ones that come to mind are Dovetail Trail Consulting, I believe is their official name. I can put their website in the chat. They're a trail building and consulting firm that is based out of, they kind of split time between Wyoming and Colorado. But it's run by two people with spinal cord injuries who get out after it. They both ride trikes. They're awesome. I think people like that, people who are they've already got their stake in the game. They're doing it. They're pushing things. Yeah.
I love it. Thank you.
And I do, Christina, I have Quinn Brett on our list.
Quinn lives in Colorado, so
Yeah.
she should be on this. Yeah.
Michael Stone made that intro for us. If for those of you who know, Michael's on our executive committee, so he was eager.
Perfect. Quinn knows every federal policy relating to accessibility and trails off the top of her head. She's a robot. It's so impressive.
Okay.
She should be on a panel for sure. She could be her own.
I'll chase her down. Derek, you're on
I'm going
mute.
to go Sharon, whose hand I see up, and then I'm going to go to John, and then to Melanie. And I want everybody to think of it through two lenses. One, who would you like to hear from, and what do you want to learn from them because you want to learn more? Or if it's something you already know and somebody you're aware of, but you think this group would benefit by hearing from. So I'll go to Sharon first for whatever you had popped your hand up. And then I go to John and Melanie with that question.
Yeah, I had one other recommendation that came to mind for a nonprofit. It's called High Fives Foundation. They've done really well. They specialize in getting people back to outdoor activities. So usually you have to be injured in an activity that was somewhat related to anything outdoors, whether that's skiing, surfing, motocross, anything. But they've specialized in that. They host surfing events, skiing events for veterans and the average person. They give out bowhead trikes as part of grants to help people access trails and different stuff. They've grown a lot. I believe the founder is Roy Tuscany. He had an injury and is walking with crutches, but his wife, I believe, is also part of one of the Olympic ski teams or was tied to Olympic skiing for a while. So,
Sharon froze for me. Did he freeze for others?
really focused on physical disability in an outdoor rec, but they'd be great minds to pick.
Fantastic. Thank you. John and then Melanie. Who does this group need to hear from, and what do those people need to be primed to address?
Yeah, so I have a different take on this. What I would really want to know is not within a particular sector of disability access, but rather somebody who has studied these. It's sort of like what Melanie was talking about with the economic impact analysis. I would want to know what would make the most impact. What kinds of changes can we implement that would impact the most people? And so we're kind of assuming our own, inserting our own interest into this conversation. And I know I do it too. Like I love to ski, I love to hike, and those are pretty common activities here in Colorado. But and we all come with our own perspectives, and those perspectives might bind us to a larger issue that's not being addressed. So what I would recommend is having someone at the table who knows about who uses outdoor access, who uses the outdoors in Colorado, and what their needs are. And if there is data about who doesn't use the outdoors, why is that? That's what I would want to know.
Really appreciate that, John. We'll start digging into who can bring some of that data to the table. Melanie, you're gonna get the last thoughts on this before I pivot to where we're gonna go next with our overall work. I'm curious, who would you most like to hear from on one of these panels to help inform you, and or who should we as a group be hearing from in your world that maybe we're missing some pieces right now?
Right, I've sent some folks to Carrie in the chat that I have not actually, as I look at it, copied to the whole group. Chris Werhane at Adaptive Adventures in Westminster, Jeff Inouye at the Breckenridge Outdoor Education Center, Cheryl Jensen, who's the founder, or someone else at the Vail Veterans Program, where they work with veterans that have a whole variety of disabilities, not all physical disabilities. Julie Talmer at the National Sports Center for the Disabled probably has some insight into manufacturers and equipment, as well as running an expansive program for folks with all sorts of different types of disabilities. I thought Christina's suggestion was a really good idea too. Somebody who's doing consulting and work in the space of building trails. But listening to people who are on the front lines of providing outdoor recreation or assisting with the provision of outdoor recreation to people who have a whole variety of disabilities, because as we've noted today, we're spending a lot of time talking about physical disabilities. And I know that these programs work with folks with all different types of disabilities.
I appreciate you bringing us full circle back to that reminder that this is about folks with different types of disabilities that affect them differently. And Christina, I see some more in there. Thank you very much. We're down to the last 3 or 4 minutes. I do hope that, and I appreciate you indulging in us doing this pivot today away from really in the weeds of what does a trail look like or how do we get signage better, and helping us think about how do we educate people to care more about this, to understand more about this. And I wanted to have that conversation for two reasons. One, because you've all named it as a challenge out there, the misunderstandings and the stigmas. Two, my experience is getting policy and systems and corporate or government cultures and practices to change doesn't happen just because you require it. We have to educate people and we have to help them understand the why behind it. So I appreciate everybody engaging in that conversation. I do want to be transparent, as I kind of alluded to at the top. We think all three of these groups of panels are really critical to informing the recommendations. I also think our timeline is very critical, which may mean that in April or May, we may need to ask you to do 2 meetings in 1 month so that we can have both the panels and have a working session with all of you. I know you've given so much of your time, and I'm reluctant to ask that, but I think it's in the best interest of this work. We will continue to work with all of you to make sure the time for doing those is as convenient as possible. Other than that, you know, in the past, I've done these soft asks where I wrap up by saying, hey, if you think of something, drop me an email. I'm going to be a little more direct about the ask, and I'm going to be a little more direct in asking Carrie to help me follow up. We need to put these panels together, and they take some time because of everybody's schedules who we're asking to join. I'm going to ask if each of you can set aside 15, 20 minutes to give this some real thought between now and the end of day Friday, and email us. Whether it's here's this person and their contact info, or here's this person and I have no idea how to get in touch with them, or hey, just somebody who knows about this. But if each of you could shoot us that email by Friday, and I'll warn you, by Thursday, Carrie will be nudging you by email. We want to make sure we're making the most productive conversations on these panels for all of you as possible. So I appreciate you doing that. Otherwise, I see Carrie's hand up, so she's going to get almost the last word here. Carrie, what's on your mind?
I just wanted to mention, to make it easier for all of you, if you'd like, I can put together kind of a boilerplate email about the task force and the specific asks for introductions to these folks that you can forward along or copy me back and just make the intro that way. Just so you guys don't have to keep reinventing and making up your own stuff. I can make it as easy as possible for you.
Thank you, Carrie. With that, I'm going to thank all of you. I also just want to, you don't see their faces in part because I asked them to keep their cameras off, but I hope you've noticed that on every one of these calls, we've had the Lieutenant Governor, frequently her Chief of Staff, and always her Senior Policy Advisor, Josh Winkler. This has been something the Lieutenant Governor has been passionate about for decades. And when the need for this task force came up, the Lieutenant Governor was the first one to stand up and say, I want to have a leadership role in this because I care. So although she doesn't speak that much on these calls, it's because she is so committed to listening to all of you. So I want to thank Lieutenant Governor and her team for being on. I want to thank all of you. It's 4:30. I promised to end on time. So I'm going to wrap it up and we'll follow up by email. But thank you all again for your time today.